Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 211, Lysis 207d to E. Socrates had said that he was about to ask which of the boys was more just and more sophos, so we could expect Socrates to carry on this line of questioning about justice and Sophia with Lysis on his own, now that Menexenus has gone. So let's see what he asks. Ego de ton Lysin e Romen, epu endego o Lysi, sfodra philese ho pater kai he meter, panuge edhos. But I asked Lysis, well, I suppose I said, Lysis, Father loves you very much, and Mother loves you very much. Absolutely, he said. Well, this doesn't seem to have very much to do with justice or Sophia expertise, and it does have something to do with philia, friendship, because he uses the verb phile. Had Socrates asked whether his parents love him, and that's it, the emphasis would be on the verb to love, and we would be thinking why Socrates asks such a strange question, because it's fairly obvious that parents love their children, at least in Platonic dialogues. And if, as we already suspect, the dialogue is about philia, such a direct question, whether his parents love him at all, would be tantamount to Plato spoon-feeding the reader. He would be saying, look, the dialogue is about philia, so pay attention. Plato doesn't usually spoon-feed his readers. This way, he has the notion of the parents loving their son, but it's come in naturally by asking a competitive question. Do your parents love you very much? The sfodra, very much, is a form of misdirection. Having established that his parents love him very much, Socrates carries on. Ukun bulointo an se hos eudaimoneston enai, poskar u. So they would want you to be as successful as possible. For how not? In other words, yes, they would want me to be successful as possible, for how would they not want that? I've translated by successful the adjective eudaimon, which literally means having a daimon, a personal daimon, who looks after your life and the way you do things. And a eudaimon is a good daimon, while a kakodaimon would be a bad one. And the difference between them really depends on your treatment of yourself. If you look after yourself and do things properly, you will have a eudaimon. If you don't look after yourself, you'll have a kakodaimon. And the state of your life will either be eudaimonia or kakodaimonia. By the time of the dramatic date of this dialogue, around 411 or something BC, the literal meaning had dropped out of use, but eudaimonia still meant a successful life where things are going the right way. It's usually translated nowadays as happiness, but that's a bit misleading. People start thinking it's about the emotion of being happy, but it isn't. It's about being successful, having a good life. So if the parents of Lysis love him very much, it would be expected that they would want him to be as successful as possible. Dokedesoi eudaimon enai anthropos tu lion te kai homeden exee poien hon epithumoi? Ma diuk emoige efe. Does a person seem to you successful if he is a slave and unable to do the things which he desires? By Zeus, it doesn't seem to me, he said. There are two parts to Socrates' question here. One is about being a slave. Is being a slave particularly successful? The problem with being a slave is that you have no agency. You cannot do what you want to do. You always do what your master tells you to do. And in that sense, a slave is not a successful person. Life isn't going the way the slave wants, unless, of course, the slave wants to be a slave. The second part is that a person is not successful if he is not allowed to do what he desires. And this is problematic. We should do what we need to do, or we should do what is right, and not necessarily what we desire. We may desire things which are wrong. Someone who does what he desires to do is not necessarily successful. We just have to look at tyrants to see that that is the case. A tyrant can murder, steal, do anything he wants, and yet his life somehow seems to be a disaster. Socrates combines being a slave with not being able to do what one desires, and that itself is also a problematic combination. Adding the part about being a slave makes it much easier for anyone to accept that not doing what one desires is the mark of being unsuccessful, because it is now associated with being a slave. It's quite often the case that when two questions are asked at once, the first question primes the respondent, the one answering, to answer in the same way. If the answer to the first question is negative, then the answer to the second question will also be negative. Being a slave is obviously bad, and this primes the respondent to think that not being allowed to do what one desires to do is also bad. This is a well-known debating technique. It's not so well known to Socrates' interlocutors in the dialogues. Uk un, ese phileo pater kai hemeter kai eudaimonas epithumus digenestai, tuto pantitropo delon hoti prothumuntai hopos an eudaimonoies. Poskaruchi, Efe. So, if the father loves you, and the mother loves you, and they desire you to become successful, this is clear in every way that they are eager for you to be successful. For how not? Again, Lysis gives that elliptic reply. It's short for, yes, they are eager, for how would they not be? It's interesting that Socrates uses the verb desire again. This time the parents desire Lysis to become successful. If the parents desire and act on their desire that he become successful, that would imply that they are not slaves. Of course, they're not slaves. They are the masters of slaves, dropping in the notion that the parents desire and actually act on their desire could be an indication that Socrates wants Lysis to react rebelliously against that. Like, it's not fair that they desire and do what they want, but he might desire things, but he is not allowed to do them. But instead of speculating, we can just carry on with the questioning. Eosin arase hapule poien, kai uden epipletusin ude diakolus poien honan epithumes. Naima die mege, O Socrates, kai malege pola kolusin. So they allow you to do the things you want to do, and they don't strike you or prevent you from doing the things which you desire. Yes, by Zeus, me indeed, Socrates. In other words, they do strike me, and certainly prevent me in many things. In other words, prevent me from doing what I would desire to do in many things. We could soften the verb to hit. The parents hit Lysis. We could say that they simply rebuke him or punish him, but literally it does mean that they beat him. Of course, Socrates asks, he says, surely they don't beat him, but Lysis says, of course they do, and they also stop him doing what he wants to do. Socrates ends his question with the verb to desire, but he first used the verb to want, as if they are the same thing. It's not quite clear how Lysis replies, either with good humour or with resentment. He simply says, by Zeus, and is emphatic in the fact that they do beat him and do prevent him from doing what he wants, but it's said in a rather neutral way, but with feeling. We should recall that Socrates warned Hippothales not to pump up the lust object, not to make him feel bigger than he should be, and yet here is Socrates appearing to side with Lysis against his own parents. This is precisely the sort of behavior the Athenians didn't like when Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth. They were probably thinking of this sort of behavior. Socrates would apparently encourage children to revolt against their parents, or at least to answer back. Socrates had said before he began talking to Lysis that he had intended to talk about justice and Sophia, expertise, and perhaps now we can begin to see that this line of interrogation is to do with justice and expertise. Are the parents just in restricting their son while he isn't an expert?